So our next panel, I think, is moderated by Raghu. So Raghu, if you can come in and introduce the panel.
Okay, we have no break now. We actually start the next panel right away. So can I invite Prashanth and Raj and up here, and Ted Zoller. Please come over, and we'll get underway straight away.
I'm going to take the axe, if that's okay.
This is a panel. This is panel 4 in sequence. First one that we have today, first of the two that we have. And let me just briefly introduce my panelists. To my right, we have Ted Zoller. He's Director, Center for Entrepreneurial Studies, University of North Carolina. I'm not going to go through the brief CV, but just suffice to tell you that when I was speaking to him a few days earlier, I found him to be a combination of everything that we are seeking to do or achieve through the symposium. That is, bring in inputs from academics, from the world of academia, bring in some inputs from what an entrepreneur thinks or seeks to do, what a financier would expect from a venture or backing a venture, and also some element of working with policymakers to understand what needs to be seeded in an ecosystem to make entrepreneurial activities beef up. So Ted, happy to have you here. Let me also introduce Ramaraj. Ramaraj is a friend of mine. We were together in a management association in Chennai here, and he's been a successful entrepreneur. He's been a corporate warrior of sorts. He's promoted companies which have been very successful, and now he's an active venture capitalist. And I'm sure he's got many anecdotes to illustrate what the expectations of a financier are. And we also are very privileged to have Prashanth Prakash here. He's from the celebrated firm Accel Partners, and I'm sure Accel Partners has won many a battle, and Prashanth has been through many of those. So the whole idea of putting together this panel is to get a different perspective on what financiers really look at from a venture or from an idea that seeks to go to the market and scale. But before I get our panelists to speak, just a couple of points I'd like to make which kind of set the stage on what this symposium has been. Because Ted has been with us for a while, but I think the two of you have just got parachuted in today. So let me set the stage a little bit more clearly. If you look at this entire supply chain or value chain of ideas moving from research labs to right to the other extreme end of the spectrum, which is really successful venture scaled up, an IPO. So you have the role of finance is very critical, whether it's at the research stage, whether it's research getting into translational research and getting into ideas into the marketplace, getting at the incubation stage, then scaling up, and then going public or IPO or whatever way you want to kind of realize value for investors. So the role of finance is there at all stages. Where this symposium and the Deshpande Foundation and the GDC, which is really what we represent at IIT Madras, is really looking at is the translational research stage, where ideas in technological and scientific academic institutions like IIT Madras, we have an excessive set of these ideas, but how many of them can potentially move into a marketplace? How many can be taken up by entrepreneurial teams and then converted into value and impact for society? I think it's the funding of these, right? And they could be at various stages. They could be at an ideation stage, they could be at a seed stage, they could be in various stages thereafter. So different entities are involved in them. Conventionally in India, you've had government organizations like the DST or other organizations who have really been funding basic R&D and getting them into some kind of products. Of late, you've had some corporates, even Indian corporates, looking at basic R&D. Maybe they are in life sciences and a few specific vectors, which are more amenable and lend themselves to this kind of investment. But we find more and more technologically savvy companies recognizing the need for technology wrapping around ventures to scale up, and therefore there's some interest that's coming by. But this nexus, if I can say, between academic institutions and industry is still in the making, is still being talked about. We're still figuring out what kind of models to build them with. So the role of financiers here, what do they expect? What do you want to convey to an academic community here? What do you want to communicate to entrepreneurs who could be with a scientific background? What should they really be cognizant of the expectations that financiers really have? That's something that we'd like to get out. And also at a later stage, money is really the grease that makes businesses grow. It is an input, it is essential to get things done, but it's also the means by which value is realized for investors. So it's clearly the currency of dialogue that really happens at all stages, at an input stage and at an output stage. So I think this mechanism, how it plays out, this dialogue between investors and entrepreneurs and investors and the scientific community, if it can be conveyed through this panel, I think it'll be a useful start. So let me start with you, Ted. What we'll have in the format here, we have about an hour to go. So maybe what we can start with is a quick 5-10 minute comment from each of you. What would be the messages that you would like to convey as financiers, or maybe as entrepreneurs who understand both sides of the coin? And then we can have some quick questions that I can take up from those, and then we'll throw it open to the audience for a discussion. So Ted, you may want to start.
So my man Karthik over there, could you bring up that PowerPoint, and do you have a clicker by any chance? So I've been having some conversations with folks here regarding some work that I did, and this is work that actually Desh has seen from NACI when he was appointed by President Obama. So this was actually inspired during the recession, and I've advanced this work pretty considerably because I know the issues pretty substantially that are being faced here. What I found is that I would run into these brilliant scientists who would have great solutions that had clear commercial potential. And in most cases, we would find that when we went to the local ecosystem to find a match, there wouldn't be a fit. For instance, someone might have a silver nanotube solution that Toshiba would likely buy if you could actually build it forward, but they had no way to get the investors to take it to the next level. You might have a cancer diagnostic or a therapeutic that has clear efficacy and has gone through scientific validation, but the regional entrepreneurs are not there. In venture capital, I want to just suggest that Accel and Sequoia and some of the, for instance, the two panelists here that are represented by those two organizations, they help to broaden the impact and bring people from the field to the influential investors who know better and can help make things happen. It was something I was really ambitious for. I wanted to see scientists who had worked their entire lives to advance their technologies see their work actually applied in the marketplace to help society during their lifetime. And it occurred to me that the capital structure was largely not optimized for it, and during the recession it was an acid test. So I was really looking to kind of change the way people think. I came up with this idea called deal makers. I'm actually changing it to rainmakers because deal makers sounds too financial engineering oriented. What we're talking about is actually putting people near others. And I would submit to you, when you have an idea that you're ready to move out in an application type of environment, there are 5 people on this planet who are ready to assist you with capital to make that happen. We just have a search problem, trying to find those investors who can make it happen. And what was funny is when you looked at the literature, for instance, that's out there, there's a clear distinction between people we call entrepreneurs and people we call investors, but the most useful people were typically people who were entrepreneurs who became serial and then became investors, to people sitting on the other side of the panel. These are the folks that I would call deal makers, people who actually organize networks, broker resources, shape networks, and syndicate and interconnect. They don't do it just to make money. They do it to advance their work. They do it to serve society. And these are generally very enlightened people, not necessarily driven just by return on investment. So if you think about a deal maker in the middle, they activate the rest of the network. You're going to find a constellation of people who would likely face your things. And I'm going to do this very quickly so I don't turn it into a lecture or what have you. What I found when I looked at the structure of firms that were being built, I apologize for this eye chart, the first 2 columns are Boston, Silicon Valley, the 2 most high performance regions in the United States, and the others are high-tech regions where technology was agglomerated in significant ways by federal investment, but they underperformed Silicon Valley and Boston. I wanted to understand the differences. So in Silicon Valley, 5,000 firms created over a 20-year period. Boston, about half that, but still substantial. And the rest are under 1,000. And what's interesting is my home region is Research Triangle Park, the second to the right. And it's one of the most substantial intellectual property generating areas in the country, yet it was at the nadir of building startups. So I was trying to figure out why we were underperforming so much. Then I looked at the social capital connections of investment, and what I found was that there was a lot of people who were connected with one deal, but there were very few people who were connected in a serial way. People who got connections to 3, 4, 5, 6 different projects that ended up going to commercialization. And what I found was there was a great number of people in Silicon Valley and Boston, much higher density of serially connected people we call serial entrepreneurs, than in the other regions. So a friend of mine, Brad Feld, who is a major thought leader in entrepreneurship, has been talking about this density hypothesis. We have to create density. And I would agree, density is true. You know, obviously there are 22,000 active entrepreneurs and investors in Silicon Valley, but I would argue that the quality of the network is what drives performance, not the density of the network. So I've been trying, in fact, we're talking about writing a book together on this topic. These are very elite people. These are people that represent the top 2.7% of all active entrepreneurs. So we're talking about very, very small numbers of people. And what's interesting is this is a chart of these major ecosystems in the United States, just to give you an idea. It's sorted by population. So Boston in the upper left, Austin in the lower right. Boston is the largest in population, Austin is the smallest. And you can see the concentration of all entrepreneurs and investors. In Silicon Valley, I call it the black hole. You can't even make out the network. There's so much activity there. And this is the density. So these are all one-level people. Boston, about half that. You had mentioned Arizona State before, Steve. Arizona State's situated in the third most populous region, Phoenix, and I was visiting with Michael Crow, the president of Arizona State, and he said, Zoller, how many people are up there? And I said, about 250. He said, I'm going to have them over to the house. And he literally asked me for a list, and he asked them over to his house to say, what's wrong with Phoenix? We have all these tools, but we have a terrible entrepreneurial network. Well, you know, this is what's interesting about this research. This is all entrepreneurs and investors. But when we look at deal makers, people with 3 or more connections, look at this. Silicon Valley is still extraordinarily dense. Boston is dense, but not as connected. Phoenix, we're talking about a number of people who would sit in this room who are serially connected. And what I found was that in Silicon Valley, serial entrepreneurs are connected to one another within 1 degree of separation 86% of the time, which means that if I'm a serial person and maybe my panelists are a serial person, I can be introduced to that person through Raghu. And that's a pretty important factor when you're talking about the efficiency of search in a region. That's one of the reasons why Silicon Valley is such a high-performing region. Well, you know, you don't just induce this. This is something that is evolved through the process of building a business environment that's very dynamic. And then when you look at major deal makers, people with 4 or more connections, you can still see we're talking about handfuls of people in most of these regions, whereas Silicon Valley has a high density of them. So that's something we need to look at. Here's my home region. And I knew I had something because when I mapped this network, and these colors represent the industries, red is bio, blue is IT, green is industrials. When I actually looked at these dots, these were all people that I knew and I've been working with for 20 years. And the size of the dot matters. The bigger the dot, the more likely, they're more, that means they're a deal maker, they're doing more. But this is the whole network. And then when I looked at the deal maker network, all these individuals, the triangles are the serial entrepreneurs, the circles are people who are primarily investors but generally have entrepreneurial backgrounds. They're all connected to one another. So people who might be specializing in bio are connecting to people who are doing IT, who are connected to people who are doing manufacturing or industrial work or what have you. And it occurred to me that when I apply it to my entrepreneurial friends and all of my students who are building companies, going to this ecosystem to get my project funded was a daunting task, and I needed to find the individual who could connect me in the region. And guess what? That person is connected elsewhere, which is helpful gateway, but also is an impediment. Because in many cases, you may have a technology that none of these investors are interested in working with. So I wanted to come up with a different model. So I worked with the Blackstone Foundation. Blackstone is a major private equity organization in the US. And they said, let's try it out. We're going to give you a grant. We're going to have you organize. And what we did is we appointed serial entrepreneurs in a region to help increase the performance of Research Triangle. And guess what? It worked. What we ended up doing is saying for all our serial entrepreneurs in the region, you have now a job. And your job is to open up the next opportunity to the entrepreneurs that are coming. And what's interesting is this is that same Research Triangle Park network. And then we appointed a series of people who are the entrepreneurs in residence for the Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network. And they had a job of connecting to individuals outside of their network, and look at the impact they had. These are the second-degree connections. These are all the connections they made on behalf of entrepreneurs, and then the companies that they formed. So those 20 people we appointed, the serial entrepreneurs, significantly influenced the network that kind of came about. So I'm going to just conclude, and I'll take any questions. The whole idea is to actually find people who are best suited to invest in your project, no matter where they are globally. And I'm very ambitious about the Indian marketplace, largely because you're so well prepared for the global market. And I'll tell you, from my own personal experience, I've had several Indian entrepreneurs go on to do great things in my home region of Research Triangle. So if you extrapolate it to where the Indian populations are throughout the United States, you know, think about the power of California, think about the power of New York, think about the power of Chicago. Connected to the power here that IIT is generating, we're talking about a very potent global network. Obviously, organizations like TIE have looked to build these connections, but I think we could actually look at this as a symbiotic model that could take your projects to the stratosphere in terms of growth and opportunity, as well as economic results. So there you go.
Thank you, Ted. That's a good overview of deal makers conceptualized. I think we'll have some questions on that. Ram, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Raghu. Good morning. I'll start by first looking at a couple of the challenges of getting ideas for funding. I was listening to two speakers this morning, and both of them said having a great idea in a lab is not good enough to attract funding. So what do funders look for? Starting point is, most venture capitalists do not back an idea, they back an entrepreneur. Ideas get modified in the marketplace, pivot, business plans change. So they look to back an entrepreneur. Now, most great innovators and researchers love what they do and may not want to be the entrepreneur. So then comes the challenge. How do we get an entrepreneur and an innovator together? Most entrepreneurs think they have passion for their idea. Now, to get that bridging between a great idea and a great entrepreneur and then taking to market is the first challenge, because we back entrepreneurs. The second is timeline. It takes a long time, usually, to get a great idea into the market. Prototyping, validations, making samples to take out and do testing, certifications, and maybe there's some regulatory approvals that are needed. It's a long lifespan between an idea in a lab and some revenue generation in the market. Now that cycle is usually not in the view of a VC, because structurally a venture capitalist has a limited time span for investment. They come in when there is a commercialization opportunity. But the long period of time and effort that goes in before that happens is usually not their focus. But fortunately, there are many others who are now starting to pay attention of that gap between an idea and getting it validated to commercialization point when you can get some Accel or Sequoia or somebody else getting interested. What we are seeing now is that places like IIT are acting as a fantastic bridge to actually cover this gap. There's a great idea in a lab, bring it to the incubation center. At the incubation center, at low risk, you're able to validate and prototype, get mentored, get into the ecosystem of a market validation, and still not lose that research and testing environment. Getting students to come in to help. A whole lot of activities at the incubation center is actually creating opportunities for investors to come in and start testing out ideas and seeing what to back at low risk and low capital. So therefore, this incubation and the mentoring and the full ecosystem that places like IIT have built is enabling ideas to come out. I was at a place called C Camp the other day in Bangalore. Fantastic ideas, really cutting edge ideas being tested, but not yet in a commercialization stage. And that gap and how to get that funding is one big challenge that they're having there, year, 2 years, and they're still not ready to take out and have enough samples. You may need a factory or an access to a factory for some of the things. So where does all this come in? So how do you fund? Grants is something we all are aware of. But there are 2 or 3 new kinds of funding that is starting to come in India. One is the corporate venture capitalists. Corporate venture capitalists are strategic investors into ideas who are willing to look and see whether this idea with support could be products that they could then take to market and make a difference in the marketplace. Their own R&D may not have the perspective and view that great researchers and innovators are looking at across. And so corporate venture capitalists are people who are starting to look, Godrej, Tata, Havells, looking at energy, looking at life sciences. There are quite a few having formally set up what they call corporate venture capital. That is really starting to take shape and accelerated interest in incubators and academic institutions. Crowdfunding is just starting in India. But for crowdfunding of an idea, the investor or the consumer who normally invests has to kind of conceive that product in his or her home. Now there is a product at the incubator here at IIT Madras, which is a mosquito killer. Most mosquito killers are repellents. This is a product that attracts the mosquito and kills it. Very unique. And he's put out a little prototype, photo, picture, samples. And therefore, I, as somebody who's getting bitten by mosquitoes, can certainly conceive of this. Say, hey, this is something I can certainly use, and I must find ways to get it into my home quickly. A great candidate for crowdfunding. I have to be able to conceive how it is applicable in my life. Then you start getting crowdfunding, at least at this stage. So we're starting to see more and more opportunities for funding beyond alumni and angels and seed. Corporate venture capital and crowdfunding are starting to come in to encourage and support ideas. But I think one mind shift that is needed, and I think morning we heard about this, is outcome-based research. That as research goes on, some part of it needs to be, with some coaching and encouragement, looked at as what applicability, what difference can it make to the citizens in the market. So questions at some time.
Thank you, Ram. That was short and very, very pointed. I think it leads to a lot of questions, and I'm sure the audience is also tickled by them. Prashanth, we'll go next with you.
Yeah, thank you. So I think at Accel we have started to see a trend where Indian entrepreneurs are now not just wanting to build for the opportunities here in India, but actually build for opportunities globally. And that's where, one of the points Ted was making is, we see this formation of these two corridors, this Boston-Bangalore corridor and the Valley-Bangalore corridor. And so what we're seeing is that the networks that Ted was talking about, now they're cross-border networks. So these networks are no longer limited to entrepreneurs there is big density in Bangalore, but that density gets amplified when you can patch that network with the network in Boston when it comes to biopharma startups and when it comes to software startups in the Valley. I'll give you a couple examples. So there's this one company called Mitra Biotech, which was these couple postdocs from Harvard, and I think one of them was from MIT and a couple from Harvard. They had this unique problem. They're building this cancer diagnostic tool. It's actually a model which kind of gives you predictive data on outcomes. And one of the biggest challenges they had in the US is availability of tissue, right? And so they actually came to Bangalore, set up their lab in Bangalore with the Kiran Mazumdar Shaw Center, and then were able to use research institutes here within India to give them quick access to cancer tissue which has not undergone therapy before. So they were able to accelerate the whole process of building, both from a cost perspective and also from just time to market, by about 2 years, right? So this is a very unique example. But and then we have similar examples where there's these entrepreneurs out of Stanford who took stuff that was in Stanford, collaborated with. And one of the things Ramaraj was talking about is it's not just only about the entrepreneur; it's about the team that you can build. And this is where cross-border teams start making things really interesting, right? So because you have the opportunity now not to just take research just out of any university there in the US or university here, but actually do it in a very frugal way by leveraging some of the possibilities here in India. So this borderless innovation that we are starting to see is something that we are really excited in Accel, and we've done something with this University of Netherlands where there's I don't know how many of you have heard of iDevice company called Forus. So Forus is one of the companies that we seeded, and a lot of the algorithms for that actually came from this, I think it was the Delft University in Netherlands, and we were very fortunate to actually get them also to be a small shareholder in this company, and today Forus has been able to create some really disruptive set of devices which are in 50 countries globally. So the point I'm trying to make is, I think there's a very global context now emerging, and I think I would say that entrepreneurs are going to have the opportunity coming out of IITs here to actually partner with entrepreneurs and other folks in not only just Bangalore, but the Valley and other places. So that's one. The second point I think Ramaraj was making was the whole time issue of when we get into these deals and when we expect returns and when we would want to kind of exit these companies. So we have been also experimenting with this idea of Accel supporting small seed funds which are more interested in deeper technologies. And the seed funds can, of course, in between get exits and make healthy returns, but we can then be closer to the idea and kind of spot some of that and have kind of early access to some of these ideas. So we have invested in two small, one founded, one which works closely with IISc in Bangalore, founded by Naganand, and another company that is another small fund which is in the AI and machine learning space called Pi Ventures. So the idea is, we look at this as an ecosystem enabler, right? These small seed funds actually will, in a sense, be a bridge between, taking an idea, work slightly. I don't think as a fund we probably have the bandwidth to, build all those relationships with and the time that needs to be invested with the universities to actually spend time and work with the incubation centers to get some of those commercialized. We can provide by actually investing in those small seed funds, we could be helpful to them. We could extend their networks. We could give them access to other important folks in the industry. So we thought that's one way we could do it. So, and lastly, I think the other thing we could provide, some of our companies are starting to become big. Flipkart, when we invested, it was a seed investment, but today Flipkart is large. So we could encourage some of them to start working more closely with academia and support thought leadership in a sense in some of these universities. So I think we are starting to see some of the next generation of these large companies. I mean, Ramaraj talked about the Tatas, the Havels, and some of the older companies, but I think one of the role we could play is encourage some of these current billion-dollar companies in India to more find mechanisms to work and absorb entrepreneurship and innovation from institutions like IITs. Thank you.
Thanks, Prashanth. I think what I'll do is I'll probably take a question or two with each of the panelists, and then I'll encourage the audience to kind of build on the thoughts that come from those. Ted, I'll go in the same sequence. Ted, I'll start with you. You showed very interesting maps and scatter maps of actual entrepreneurs and probably firms which were there in those regions. Now, is this a coincidence that most of these regions are around good universities, or did the universities play a very central role, or were they number two or three in the pecking order in terms of impact that they made, and there was something else? And what I'm trying to get out of this is, intuitively, I believe the universities would have, the MITs and the Stanfords and all of them would have played a role. But what exactly was that role, and is that what we are talking about in this symposium, or is there any gaps that you see between, let's say, what you've learned about IIT system and what you've seen there?
So the point of the study was to look at this large bolus of scientific capability and intellectual property that's been created around universities, and to see how we could actually encourage its application and use in society. So the correlation is absolutely true. Universities are a major source of new innovation and new intellectual property, but they aren't necessarily a best practice for bringing it to market. And as a matter of fact, I would argue that universities have not figured out the model to do it. And innovations like what Steve shared at UMass Lowell, what we're seeing at some of the major universities, we're starting to deal with this. And people like Deshpande are provoking change within these universities. And I'm picking on my own institution, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. This is an organization that's really tried to innovate in making it frictionless, to bring technologies to market and to be a helpful enabler of that, knowing that what the university does is research and teach, and they might be able to do development. They do not commercialize. However, we're sussing up a very interesting dimension that's around the network of alumni at each of these prominent universities. And I was very intrigued yesterday when I heard that IIT, half of the major startups in Silicon Valley had major representation by IIT alums. That is a powerful network, and I'm so happy to hear and gratified that there's a leader within IIT Madras that's focused on actually the alumni connections, industrial relations as a combined model, because that's going to pay dividends. So we're playing around with this idea of how do we activate university networks, because many of your alumni have gone on to do prominent things within industry. LinkedIn is a great tool, but there's probably a better way to get this data and make it much more strategic in connecting innovators to your own alumni as a model to help transition. We created, as an experiment, a thing called the Carolina Angel Network. This is an angel fund comprised of our own alumni. We now have 300 members in this, and you pay a small fee to get access. The deals come through. The alumni invest in those deals. Guess what? It's been open for 9 months, and we've already had 1 exit, and we've got 2 on the table. We syndicated and worked with Duke University, which is 8 miles away, and NC State University, which is 15 miles away. We're a research triangle All 3 of them have created angel funds comprised of their alumni. We're starting to syndicate among the 3 universities. Now, what are we doing? We're actually teeing up opportunities for other capital providers who could much rather be involved with expansion after we validate. So this money is used to validate and get to a certain proof point where the valuation of the technology is proven so that the capital structure would actually move right in. There's so much liquidity in the market now with private equity and venture capital. They're not looking for small bets. If Accel gets into the small bet business, we're not doing our job. So IIT has a great opportunity to actually start interconnecting with its network to try to validate technologies that an Accel or Sequoia or, frankly, a number of super angels and the corporates could take these opportunities and bring them through the market. We are in a market economy. We have to be aware that capital efficiency is a really important matter. And we should not be focused on exitability. We have to be focused on impact. IIT is driven for impact. So a lot of it is how you measure, how you get to a certain point. And the VCs may not like it, because if you end up implementing a strategy like this, the valuations will be higher. But frankly, I think they would rather see a proven technology where they've got a higher likelihood of success than something they're taking a winger on. So I would encourage IIT to really mine these relationships and maybe convert it and activate that alumni network to help support your nascent entrepreneurs. It's a long-winded answer to your question.
No, that's fine. That's good. Ram, I think you spoke about looking at professors or faculty here who are technical leads and then getting an entrepreneur. Well, that's a model that that seems to be working, at least in the Deshpande Foundation, and we're kind of giving wing to that idea. And but you also said that you don't back the idea as much as you back the entrepreneur. I think you meant the team, because increasingly now startups are team funded and not individual. Exceptions may be there. But how do you build chemistry? Chemistry doesn't happen if you get a random entrepreneur and a random professor and put them together, however good the idea is, or however good the professor and the entrepreneur. So what's your advice from a financier or a venture capitalist? How do you build chemistry? When you synthesize a team like this, which is really, or when you're trying to make a team, what are the ways by which you can build chemistry into it?
bharatmatrimony.com. Yeah. So, there was an experiment done a few years ago of trying to match entrepreneurs to ideas, kind of come meet. Lot of great ideas, lot of great entrepreneurs, nobody liked each other. So it is not a marketplace alone that is going to make it work. I think it takes, and I think the platform that IIT has at its incubator is a great way for a slow meeting of minds. If I work together as a student for 4 or 5 years, I'm a little more comfortable. I find some team members and I start. But then I have to meet with my professor and then work with him on an idea, first of all, to be able to talk to the professor as now almost an equal and say, hey, I know how to take to market, you give me the idea. That itself takes time if it is within the same ecosystem. So this is a journey, and it takes a lot of time and effort to work. We have seen co-founders who have known each other come together, and we have gladly funded and found that a lot of effort has to go in just to keep them together. So it's a great theoretical idea. It takes a lot of effort to make it work, and small steps. And I think the incubator and the model here, where both are incentivized to succeed, equity for the faculty, all of that is helping people think of the probability of taking to market. And as success comes and exits happen, and money is actually on the table that could be used for something, I think we'll see more enterprising energy.
Yeah, you also spoke of corporate venture capital. How patient is this capital? I mean, our sense, and I don't know if I'm shooting my mouth here, corporates tend to be more short-termish, I mean, by the nature of their operations. Are the venture capital arms a little bit more patient? Are they more willing to put skin in the game and take a punt on the teams and technology and so on?
Most of these companies have their own R&D. If you take Sun Pharma, Lupin, they all have their own R&D. So they have an understanding of the time from an idea or a patent to market. So they have an idea. They're broadening their success rate by looking at ideas outside their own labs. So they are a lot more patient and understand the gap between an idea, market validation, certifications, and commercialization. They have a better understanding than a pure investor, which is why in that domain, you should go domain special corporate and not necessarily anybody who has the money. Which is why HNIs, angels who don't have domain, could be frustrating experience. But if somebody comes in from that domain, they have the same challenge in their lab. And here is a greater probability to win. So they're a little more patient if they're in that domain.
Yeah, somebody yesterday used the word Banya investor, to kind of connote that, a pure financial return expectation vis-a-vis a larger domain expectation.
I think the underlying principle of a Banya investor is to make sure that we all look at creating an impact in the market and making some money out of it. So
there's a role for that as well. Prashanth, you made an interesting point that you're looking at borderless innovation now. But from what I took away from your quick intervention was it's more still looking at science and technology that's grown or thought about or hatched in US or developed countries and then kind of exploited in a typical outsourcing model. Is that what you were alluding to? Or is there also a reverse flow, where there's technology here,
Yes.
and which then collaborates for better exploitation? What exactly? I mean, we're looking at the reverse as well here, sitting here in IIT.
Right. So I think we have seen both cases, right? And I think that's how you will see.
Some examples do you have, or can you share?
So I was giving the example Forus. The idea of building this device in Forus was born in India, right? It was in Bangalore so he was part of Philips R&D, and he came out of Philips. Casey came out of Philips R&D in Bangalore and started this. And so to make his platform more powerful, now you can collaborate in a cross-border manner, right? Yes, if would he have found something similar in India and picked it up? Yes, that would have been great. But I'm not only talking about the example like in Mitra Biotech, where there are these folks in Boston who come and leverage institutes in India. But I think any kind of such collaborations actually I think accelerate learning on how to do a lot of these industry collaborations and transference of knowledge that needs to happen. So I think in a way, I think it really accelerates the process.
Okay. What I'm going to do now is open the floor to questions. So please raise your hand, introduce yourself, and quickly ask a question. Can we have the mics around, please? I think Professor Milind has a question.
This is Milind Attare, professor from IIT Bombay. A question to both the American ecosystem as well as to the Indian ecosystem. We say that in Indian context, the moment somebody gets invested, the investors start micromanaging the company or impacting the thought process of the people who started the company. Is that true? What do you think about this? And what happens in the American context also?
It's obviously not true with people here.
So how many, everyone heard the question, do investors micromanage the process? Investors that I've met are generally focused on value add. And you can find a bad actor, someone who just wants to monetize and exit right away because they wear it on their sleeve. It's a question of due diligence. And what you're looking for is the ideal connection so that you're in a boat together with oars all rowing together, your investor and your management team. I think some of the challenges that you hear about are driven by expectations of the scientific founder becoming the CEO. And at a certain point, those individuals may or may not have the domain expertise to run the company. You might be better off at that point hiring a professional CEO, but a startup can't afford a professional CEO in most cases, unless you are plucked out of obscurity by some capital source. So I'm going to answer your question quite simply. Be looking for value-added investors who bring connections to the domain, understand the industry, connections to downstream users who can apply the technology, connections to potential partners and maybe even acquirers that will put you in the position to be successful, and someone who understands their swim lane. What I mean by that is the investor plays a role as a fiduciary to their limited partners or to the people they're responsible to use the capital for a productive way. They are responsible for the outcomes of the company, so it makes sense that they will have some kind of accountability set up to you, and vice versa. But it's a reciprocal process. A great investor-founder relationship typically is a symbiotic relationship, and you rely heavily on the investor as a way to give insight, strategic advice. So if you do find a sticky investor who's micromanaging you, don't accept the investment. It's that simple.
Yeah, so I think here the challenge in India is the maturity of our ecosystem. I think what we have there in the valley is about 30 years, 35 years of this engagement model between the entrepreneur and the advisory nature or of the broader ecosystem that comes into play. But I think we don't have the number of serial entrepreneurs who have either become investors, who understand what it takes to build a company and what it takes to be associated in a journey of building a company. So I think the more and more you move from pure financial investing to more company building type of investing, which is what you'll see in a lot of the next generation of funds that are coming up, I think you'll see that change. But that said, I think the challenge we have seen, we have invested in this, like I told you, the small fund called Idea Spring. So the our early observations of people in academia, whether they're professors or people, moving in and building teams, like you were saying, just that process is extremely complicated. As investors, you need to have a lot of patience and figure out ways in which you can be supportive without being overbearing in that process. And because you can't accelerate some of those product market fit challenges that will come up, right? So you need to allow some of that to organically evolve. So if you kind of force some of those, and which is what sometimes investors do, then you're kind of going against the gut of the entrepreneur, and your outcomes are not going to be there.
Hi, this is Ashwin from IIT Madras, and I have a question for Ted. Ted, I really liked your network diagrams that you showed, and I was thinking that it might be interesting to actually look at the Chennai and the Bangalore ecosystems, for instance, and do similar analysis. The question I had was, do you think you'd see any difference in your conclusions if you took your entrepreneurs and split them into two categories? One, entrepreneurs that were driven by core innovation that comes out of intellectual property generated in the university environment, versus entrepreneurs who were more operationally intensive, for instance, e-commerce kind of startups that don't necessarily rely on core tech, but rely more on the ability to execute. And the reason I ask that is some of your ecosystems around the University of Arizona or Research Triangle Park seem to be more predicated on the former, core IP coming in, whereas Silicon Valley is no longer just Stanford based. I mean, there are all other kinds of entrepreneurs. And so I'm wondering, if you looked at those separately, would you see something different? And would there be lessons that university ecosystems, such as the one we're trying to create at IIT Madras, could draw?
I think you're absolutely right. I think that when you're talking about nascent technologies that are on the frontier, you have to spend extra effort to actually find the fit with the investor community that will support it and the entrepreneurial community that will build the teams to take it to market. So I think extra effort needs to be focused on intellectual property driven deals versus distribution deals that are more focused on just implementing and executing in the market. I looked at, for instance, I did a big project for the Los Angeles County Economic Development Authority. Los Angeles is going through, and I would argue, by the way, for those of you connected in LA, that's the next Silicon Valley, largely because the first wave was around the pipe, building the internet. The next wave is about media. And Los Angeles is surging now. But what I'm seeing is, because media is largely distribution, the connection to intellectual property sources is less important. But I'm seeing an interesting triangle, going back to what you had mentioned, between Silicon Valley, LA, and overseas. I'm seeing it in Bollywood, as a matter of fact, because media and tech are starting to converge because people want to actually experience media in a different way. So I think you have to evaluate in any market how technology is disrupting that market, and then focus on those frontier areas. And VC plays there very, very well. On the distribution side, corporate generally plays pretty well because all of them want to stay up and keep share. And they have a lot of, you wouldn't believe the cash balances of these companies right now. And acquiring a company is an afterthought in many cases. So be thinking about whether or not you're looking to develop new intellectual property, focus on the investors who'll bring value add versus doing maybe your application is a more distribution-oriented model, in which case work with the marketplace leaders who are distributing and actually putting and executing that capability in the market. Does that answer your question?
I think there's a question here.
I'm Arvind Krishnaswamy from Bharat Petroleum. We have a small startup fund, and the minor difference is we give this fund as a grant rather than as an investment to different startups. So we've been having a lot of, I would say, trouble deciding how do we give funds. We have long-term problems which we need other R&D centers to sort out, and we have a lot of problems which we don't know that we actually have. And as we go around trying to talking to different innovation hubs and different venture people, etc., we find that some of them have some parts of the problem solved, and we need to try and link different people. To give you a small example, we've been talking to Indian Institute of Science. There's a professor there who's working on spectroscopic effects and trying to figure out purity of elements. And we think there's a great use of it in the industrial, petroleum and petrochemical industry. But we don't have the wherewithal to help him take it up to the next level in terms of creating, we can help him build a prototype. But from the prototype to think about scale, to think about the commercials, etc., we need somebody else to come in and we can do the funding for that. So we are coming into these sort of niche problems of how do we go about trying to link. So actually we are now trying to link venture capital to these R&D centers on specific projects, and we find that it's not easy doing that. So if there's a platform for that, it would be extremely helpful for us.
Well, I think you come to the right place. You know, the Gopalakrishnan-Deshpande Center is really looking at moving ideas from lab to the market. And this whole symposium is really looking at 4 or 5 problems, overlapping problems that actually address this issue. So maybe we should have a dialogue, but if any of my co-panelists have a view, we can, yeah.
So I can't resist this one because it's something I've been ambitious about for a long time. Believe it or not, the first academic article on what they call the success theory of the firm was in 1974. Academics have been trying to figure out whether or not there's a formula of commercialization and, is there a balancing act? And there are many commercial efforts that have looked to implement ideas that have come out of that body of theory. For instance, there's a wonderful venture capital organization called Correlation Ventures in the US that's looking at kind of all the factors that relate to, what would light up an outlier that would make them, a unicorn or what have you. I don't believe that there is a science around it. It might happen in my lifetime. I think we are becoming a perfect market. If you were to put the colleagues, and I was incidentally in a meeting with the top 50 VCs, I don't even know why I was there, to be honest with you, but the top 50 VCs in the US, and the prevailing point of view in that meeting was that the market is completely efficient, meaning there isn't a worthy deal that's not finding money. And that was the prevailing opinion. Doesn't that offend you? I raised my hand and I said, I know many worthy entrepreneurs that are not being funded, and I think you guys are in a bubble, and they talked me down. And I think what they were saying is, within the Series B, Series C marketplace, within the ecosystem of Silicon Valley, they know what the deals are and how things are happening. It is a very efficient market. but they are not reaching out to places that are extraordinarily capable. And, you know, I'm just floored by what's happening in India. And the enlightened VC organizations are coming here and have been here for, I would argue, 10, 12 years, which is exciting. To get to your question, there are a number of different efforts to look at the factors in you know, a company and a team to do due diligence. Your best way to validate it is to talk to industry domain experts who understand the industry and see where this would fit. And would it likely be a startup? And this is a key challenge. Would it likely be a startup, or should it be just a license? Many push technology efforts make the mistake of forming a startup around a technology that just is kind of an intermediate capability that needs to be licensed to an existing entity. So be careful in that decision. And I would suggest to you that there are many resources online that look at the factors, but bring domain experts in, regional experts, and I'm ambitious to hear what the Deshpande Center is going to be doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, you have a question? I think we'll take 2 last questions because we're a little over time. Yes, sir.
My name is Sambamurthy from Nagarjuna Group. Somebody mentioned about R&D facilities in corporate centers. Like, for example, in our fertilizer company, we have a research and development division, and we do quite a bit of work there. And what we find is that in the Indian system of getting these things done, there's a lot of lethargy, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of report writing, this kind of work, which we are absolutely unsuited for this job in the R&D division. There are a bunch of very good technologists who are working day to day on very interesting problems. They have technical solutions, but they are absolutely helpless when it comes to making this kind of paperwork that's necessary for taking this forward. Because in the Indian context, you cannot do anything without the government some or other interfering in the matter. This is one of the problems where I think we need help from institutions who have, let's say, research scholars who do patents for their research programs. They usually do a good literature survey. They can write a good report. They can make information clearly, bring out the information as a bureaucrat somewhere sitting in a ministry would like to see it. This is one of the issues which we face, which prevents us from moving forward in a fast pace. The second problem that we have is the timeline. We are working on several products, where we are not alone. We might have a very innovative idea, but these ideas might be available elsewhere in the world. So we are racing against time. And when we try to do this, we find that the time taken by institutions such as IIT is enormous. It's really, we can understand that the professors and others have got a lot of conflicting interests. They have a lot of programs. And so we are running from pillar to post. We go from one place to another trying to find out how we can involve the academic people into the program so that we get very good ideas. These are some of the challenges that we face, and sometimes we lose a good opportunity to a competitor somewhere else who has been faster, more up to date, and he's able to come out much more successfully. Might be in any country, I don't know.
No, I think your points are well noted, and being from IIT, I think we should take cognizance of what you're saying, and we're definitely addressing some of these. Vishy, you had a question? I'll take one last question because we're really out of time.
Okay. My name is Vishy Vishwanathan, and I am an IIT Madras alumnus. Along with some of my friends, I'm quite deeply involved in mentoring some of the startups. And one of the observations I have, and I'm sure many of you have as well, is that if you look at the incubators, there is this top tier. You know, people who are working, great team, great idea, disruptive technology, potential unicorns, if you want to use that name. And that's a no-brainer, and I think many of the VCs would be seriously interested. And there are the other bottom of the tier, which is, not not great ideas or not great team, whatever. I think we see a lot of middle tier ideas, and these are good ideas solving a real problem, but I think they are probably quickly generating cash, potential to generate cash, but they're not going to give 10x exits and things like that. So what are the avenues available to for funding these kind of ideas? And is there something which in India it has, or even abroad, has it been tried? And do you seriously look at such ideas?
I think by the very nature, venture funds will not look at those ideas, right? So we look for ideas that, if they work, can become very large and disruptive. So you would have to, in these cases, look at maybe smaller family offices. I've seen some of the family offices starting to become very active in the country, and they're looking for safer bets, right? So maybe things that give them quick cash flow and helps diversify some of their investment in private, some private investments, and maybe some angels. But yeah, it's a tougher one to get funded. Where, like you said, you know, they are by their very nature not going to give outsized returns, and they'll definitely not pass the hurdle for most VC investing.
So there's one thing, I've been attacking that exact same problem, and I think one of the challenges, and there was a discussion about crowdfunding as a potential. I was involved in the Title II authorization, which is the kind of democratization of crowdfunding, and it's really unclear as to whether or not that's going to end up being a really useful a tool or not, but I'm seeing sophisticated investors starting to organize around that to form capital. So this is quite nice. I also see building angel networks as really the kind of middle ware of funding. And we've seen a huge increase in angel activity in the US that's organized now in funds and things of that nature. The problem is angels don't typically syndicate into venture capital. And we have to figure out ways to get that to happen. I think angels sometimes can be ignorant as to how exuberant they can be on the value of the company. I've done a course, and this is interesting. Do we have any IIM people here, business professors? So I want to give you a job. Business students are trained to look at markets and to scrutinize opportunity, and they all are looking for experience that they want to be these guys when they grow up. I've set up a really novel course that I call Discovery, where I take the MBA students, the master's level generally, and divide them between founders and funders, and they have a job. They go and talk to the founding team, and the founding team says, what is your biggest problem? What is your biggest barrier that you don't have time to work on? Almost inevitably, an entrepreneur can see 3 months down the road, they can't see 6 months, can't see a year. And they say, this is the thing, if I had a team of people working on it, this is what I would do. And they do a custom an analysis that takes about 6 weeks to help that team overcome that barrier. The other team is called the funder team, and their job is to look at it from a third party. They're to take the lens of an investor, and they say, this is how the industry's organized, here's your competition, this is where you fit, this is the problem, and they're the ones who say, your baby is ugly. But the feedback is really critical to that entrepreneur, because if they don't know where they're weak, they don't even have a shot with these guys. So I call it the car wash. It's like taking a venture and cleaning it up. One, very supportive of the entrepreneur. The team is working with them on their problems. And another one where we basically show them where they need to strengthen their opportunity. It cleans the deal so that maybe it'll have a higher likelihood of attracting someone who sees the upside.
Thank you, Ted. I think I have to bring this session to a close because we're out of time. So please join me in thanking and applauding all the panelists. Thank you very much, Ram. Thank you, Prashanth, and thank you, Ted. We will break for tea, but before you leave, we have a pleasant duty. So I over to Shiva to do the honors.
I have the pleasant duty as usual. I have to. Excited. And this is the book that Raghu asked for. He said, that's the book I want. Right? So thank you very much. Intense discussion.